right now. This meeting is being recorded. We will have a Q&A session later. So if you don't want your name or a camera face to be recorded, please, you can change your name in the Zoom room, or you can turn your camera off. Please use those options. I'm gonna start the meeting by introducing ceta, just very briefly. So let me share the screen. Oops, I do not want to leave the meeting. Okay. So just very briefly about ceta and Advocates for Children of New York. ceta is a federally funded parent support center located in Queens. We mostly serve Asian parents in New York City, Asian parents and individuals with disability, Asian parents who have children with disabilities in New York City, Queens, Long Island area. We provide support regarding special education, disability services, and also we offer transition classes for individuals with disabilities. Advocates for Children of New York, AFC for short, its mission is to ensure a high quality education for New York students who face barriers to academic success, focusing on students from low income backgrounds. AFC achieves this through 4 integrated strategies: free advice and legal representation for families of students, free trainings and workshops for parents, communities, and educators and other professionals to equip them with 1, advocate on behalf of students, 2, policy advocacy to effect changes in the education system and improve education outcomes, and 3, impact litigation to protect the right to quality education and to compel needed education reform. We have 2 guests. We're so lucky to have the 2 guests from AFC today. Ashley Grant, if you can wave. Ashley Grant directs the post-secondary readiness project at AFC, a team focusing primarily on helping older youth receive the educational support they need. This includes access to a diploma, transition supports, and programming for overage, undercredited students. Ashley also coordinates the statewide multiple pathway to a diploma coalition. And she began their career, as a special education teacher in Los Angeles and holds a BA in sociology from University of California, a master's in special education from California State University, and JD from New York University School of Law. Another guest we have is Laura Dean Pierre. Wave if you. Okay, she is a licensed social worker and she's a senior transition advocate on the post-secondary readiness project at AFC. In this role, she helps students and families gain access to appropriate education services and settings while preparing to transition to their post-secondary goals. Laura Dean holds a bachelor's degree in psychology from Pacific Union College and a master's degree from Fordham University. Today, Ashley and Laura Dean are going to help us understand the New York State diploma options for students with disabilities. Particularly, we'll be focusing a lot on the changes and updates due to COVID-19, because to go through all the entire information, it takes a very long time. So today the focus will be more on the COVID-19 updates and changes. So I'm gonna pass my mic to Ashley. Ashley, take it away.
Hi there, can you guys hear me?
Yes.
Great. Thank you so much, Kelly. Laura Dean and I are really excited to be here. I'm going to share my screen. So give me just a second.
As Ashley's sharing her screen, if there are any questions throughout the presentation, feel free to put it in the chat. I do not speak Korean, but I'm hoping that someone will be able to translate any of the Korean written questions.
Yes, we will. If anybody puts questions in the chat box, we'll be translating to you, and we'll translate the answers in Korean and Chinese as well.
Fantastic. So we're going to also take some breaks for questions. So Laura Dean will be answering questions in the chat, and we'll also take some breaks if there are questions that are coming up. We might hold them and answer them out loud.
Fantastic. That works great.
Great. So thank you so much, Kelly, for the introduction. I now don't need to tell you about Advocates for Children, but I do want to just share this phone number and website. Our helpline is available Monday through Thursday from 10 a.m. to 4 p.m. And we have education specialists ready to speak your language and to give you information about your rights in public school. And there's also a lot of information about rights in public school on our website, and we'll circulate the link at the end. And this information is available in multiple languages also. Okay, so today we're going to talk about graduation requirements in New York City with a focus on students with disabilities. Then we're going to talk about COVID-19 changes. We'll spend a little bit of time talking about students who are at the end of high school and who need more time. And then we'll, assuming that we have additional time, we will take some time for questions. So that's the plan for today. So in New York State, there are diplomas and non-diploma credentials. And so we're not going to talk about all of these diplomas and credentials, but I just want to walk through them. So diplomas, which any student with disability can be working toward, are advanced regents diplomas, local diplomas, and high school equivalency diplomas. All of these are legitimate diplomas that lead to college, career, and the military, and that open doors to all of those things. In New York State, there are also two kinds of non-diploma credentials. The Skills and Achievement Commencement Credential, or the SAC, which is a credential for students with disabilities who are recommended for alternate assessment. And then the Career Development and Occupational Skills Credential, or the CDOS, which we're going to talk a little bit more about next. There used to be something called an IEP diploma, which does not exist anymore. So if you are being told by your school anything about an IEP diploma, no students in school right now should be working toward those. So I want to talk briefly about the CDOS, one of the non-diploma credentials in New York State, before we talk about graduation requirements. So one non-diploma credential in New York State is the CDOS. And the CDOS is available to any student. It's intended to document the student's entry-level work skills. I'm going to talk a little bit more later about how this credential can be used to replace one of the regents exams for students working toward a local or a regents diploma. And the CDOS can also be awarded alone or added to a diploma. And so many students with disabilities, students with sort of more severe disabilities may be working toward a CDOS alone, or might be using it as a way to earn a credential, or I'm sorry, earn a diploma. So the requirements for a CDOS under option 1, which is sort of the most meaningful way to get a CDOS credential, is a lot of work. It requires 216 hours or 4 credits of either career and technical education or work-based learning experiences. So these are hands-on career-based hours of internships or CTE. It also requires that the school work with the family to create a career plan with the student, and also requires an employability profile, which outlines the skills that a student has developed that will be helpful for them in college or career. And so this is a great option because it demonstrates a student's readiness for college and career, and is often a lot more sort of meaningful in terms of preparing a student for life after high school than a 5th Regents exam. Oh, sorry about that. There are also some changes to the CDOS due to COVID-19. We're going to talk about both the changes last year and this year because last year schools didn't do a great job of sharing changes with families, and so it may be important to have that information. So last year, during the 2020-2021 school year, work-based learning and CTE programs could be virtual, meaning students could get their internship hours or their career training for a CDOS through Zoom or other remote learning experiences. And so during the pandemic, the CDOS credential can be awarded even if due to remote learning, the school cannot provide all of those work-based learning hours, so all of those 216 hours of work-based learning hours that a student needed. Okay, I'm having trouble with my screen. Give me just a second. All right. So there's also an option 2, or a second way that students can earn a CDOS, and that's to pass an approved work readiness assessment. We don't really recommend this pathway because most of these assessments are not particularly meaningful and don't do a very good job. Preparing for these assessments doesn't usually do a great job of preparing students for life after high school, but the law allows them as a way to earn a CDOS, so we want to talk about it. So this is just a list of state-approved work readiness assessments or computer-based tests that students can take to demonstrate readiness for a CDOS. And last year in 2019-2020, graduates were exempt from taking those assessments if they otherwise met CDOS standards. So what it meant last year during COVID is most of those assessments could not be administered, and so students could still get a CDOS if they met CDOS standards. And there's no guidance on this yet from New York State for the current school year, but if you have a student who you want to be or a child who you want to be working toward a CDOS, we'd encourage you to talk to your school because the state has allowed a lot of flexibility during the pandemic for how students do work-based learning. And there's some really interesting, innovative things happening around the city in terms of computer-based and virtual internships and vocational training. All right. So those are, I'm not going to talk more about the SAC non-diploma credential because that has not changed in COVID-19, but are there any questions before we move on about these non-diploma options?
지금까지 한 내용에 대해서 질문 있으신 분들 질문 부탁드릴게요. 챗박스 해주셔도 되고 마이크 켜시고 질문하셔도 됩니다. Sorry, I just told them to ask questions in Korean.
Great, thank you.
I see, someone's asking for the PowerPoint. Yes, we will be sharing the PowerPoint with you at the end of this presentation. We'll be emailing it out to ceta and they will share it with everyone.
파워포인트는 저희가 받아서 보내드리도록 하겠습니다.
Okay. We'll stop again for questions. So if there are any, feel free to ask them in the chat and we can come back to them at the next pause. Okay, so next we're going to talk about getting a diploma in New York State. To earn a diploma in New York City and New York State, students need 44 credits to pass a series of exams, and that results in a diploma. We have a link here that will circulate with this email that has a lot of information about the specific credits and exam requirements. At some schools that are referred to as a consortium or PBAT schools, students can substitute these exams for performance-based assessments. If your child attends a PBAT or a consortium school, you probably already have this information. But those schools are authorized by the state to substitute portfolios or performance-based assessments for exams. But for all other schools in New York City, be them charter schools or any other public school, these are the requirements for a diploma. So first, students need 44 credits in all of the right places. So students need 8 English credits, 6 science credits, 2 English as a second language credits, 5 gym or health, 8 social studies, 6 math, 2 music or art, and 7 other elective credits. We're going to send around a link where there's a worksheet where you can keep track of your students' graduation progress. I will also put that in the chat. And you can also now check your students' progress toward graduation using the New York City Schools account website. And if you do not yet have the login information for your New York City Schools account website, then we'd encourage you to contact your school. And if you continue to run into roadblocks, to let ceta or Advocates for Children know. So there are some changes this year in course credits. This year and last year, due to COVID-19, attendance does not count towards grades. So, so many students are struggling to either attend school if they're hybrid or attend regularly during remote instruction, and attendance should not be negatively affecting a student's grades. There are also no lab requirements for the science regents exam. So we don't know yet if the regents exams will be administered. It seems unlikely, but regardless, high school students do not need the normal number of required lab requirements in science to get credit for those courses. And this year, there is also additional time to finish NX or no credit grades. So the Department of Education has given students more time to correct their NX or their in-progress grades. Makeup work for the 1920 school year was due at the end of January, but if your child still has an NX grade from last year, your school should have reached out to you about whether they may have more time. NX grades from this semester can be made up until June of this summer. And NX grades for the rest of the school year, students will have until January of 2022 to make up. Your school, if your child had an NX grade from last year and they haven't yet made it up, your school should have been reaching out to you because the New York City has said that students might get even more time to make up their NX grades from last year if they had substantial delays in getting a device, they had sustained internet connectivity issues, they had a traumatic illness or death in their family, or they had another hardship that impacted their academic progress. This is a lot of us during COVID-19. So please talk to your school now if you think that your child needs more time to make up an NX grade from last year. And given all of the regents waivers from last year that I'm going to talk about in a little bit, it can be more advantageous to make up a grade from last year than to try to retake the course in another semester. Okay, so I'm going to pause there. Are there any questions about grades or credits? We're going to talk next about exams.
학점이나 그런 거에 대해서 지금 말씀하신 내용에 질문 있으시면 질문 부탁드릴게요. So Hewa's been
Yeah, I have a question.
translation in the chat. Hewa?
예, 선생님 저기 뭐지 그거 NX 학점 받는 거 디바이스가 늦게 왔다거나 인터넷 연결 관련 이슈 있다거나 여러 가지가 있잖아요. 근데 그거를 증명해야 하는지 학교에 어떻게 서류를 통해 증명하게 되는지 궁금합니다.
Oh, a great question. So she's asking, for those who had the issue with the receiving devices and the internet connection, do they have to have some sort of proof that they did have those delays to be qualified to get the extra time?
That's a great question. We were told that letters were going to go out to families of students who still have NX grades from last year by this weekend. So you should have received a letter from your school. It does not seem like anybody's going to have to prove connectivity issues. Students should be working directly with their families, should be working directly with their schools. If for some reason there's like a disagreement with the school, then we would encourage you to reach out to your superintendent or to call our helpline. But we haven't yet heard of any sort of disagreements between schools and students. Our guess is that schools are going to be awarding additional time pretty liberally to students who need them.
인터넷 커넥션이나 아니면은 디바이스를 늦게 받으셔가지고 좀 시간이 더 필요하신 분들 같은 경우는 뭐 특히 특별히 뭐를 이렇게 증명을 하지 않아도 된다고 그러네요. 그리고 아마도 학교들이 그런 시간을 더 엑스트라 시간을 주는 거에 굉장히 자유가 많이 있기 때문에 혹시라도 이런 이슈가 있으셨다면은 학교한테 연락해 보시는 게 좋을 것 같습니다.
Great. Okay. Are there any other questions, folks who are moderating chat before we move on?
Thank you for asking. There's one question that came in. I'm just going to read it in Korean and then translate it.
Great.
학점이 인정되는 점수 몇 점 이상을 받아야 하는 건가요? 예를 들어 65점 이상 등 그리고 others에 해당하는 과목은 어떤 건가요? Fantastic question. So she's asking for the credits that they have to receive. What is the number of credit that they have to get? I think you mentioned that in the PowerPoint earlier. 44 credits. And then what are the other courses that she's asking?
Other students and schools have flexibility on what those other courses are called. They're referred to as electives, and those can be an additional science class or an additional language class, or they could be something more flexible, like schools offer sort of all kinds of interesting elective courses in various things: art, culture, technology, career.
학교마다 다르고 또 이 부분에 있어서는 굉장히 좀 자율적인 부분이 있다고 그러시는데요. 뭐 사이언스 클래스를 하나 더 들어도 되고 뮤직을 하나 더 들어도 되고 학교마다 좀 이렇게 제공하는 클래스가 각각 다 다르다고 그러네요. 근데 꼭 들어야 되는 요 크레딧을 빼고는 굉장히 좀 자율적이다고 그렇게 말씀하십니다. And then there was another question. What is different from SAC and CDOS?
Yeah, so in the chat, I wrote that the SAC is only for students who have a severe cognitive disability, and their IEP has to recommend that they are alternatively assessed. And so the SAC can only be given to those students, whereas the CDOS, any student can receive the CDOS and use it as a +1, so as a 5th exam, or they can receive it as a standalone using some of the features that Ashley previously showed. Ashley, can you go back to the CDOS slides showing the 4 credits, the 216 hours, and creating a career plan and the employability profile. But right now, because of COVID, there's a lot of flexibility on how to gain those hours, or for schools who aren't able to provide those like work-based learning hours.
Thank you. So SAC 같은 경우는 지적 장애가 있는 학생에게만 주어지는 옵션이고요. CDAS 같은 경우는 누구나 받을 수 있는 자격이라고 합니다.
There any other questions that we want to pause for now?
I think we're good to move on to the next.
Great. Okay, give me just a second. Okay, so we talked about how students need 44 credits and exams to get a diploma. And so next I'm going to talk about the exam requirements regularly and now during COVID. So in general, students need to pass 4+1 exams. They need to pass an English language arts exam, a math exam, 1 history exam, so US history or world history, world history, and 1 science exam. And the 5th exam, or the +1, can be another regents exam, so another science exam, another math exam, another history exam, or can be other +1s I'm going to talk about. In general, students need a 65 on all of these exams to earn a Regents diploma. But there are a bunch of safety nets and appeals for students with disabilities. So students with disabilities can earn a local diploma, which is, as I said at the beginning, a valid New York State diploma by passing those 4+1 exams with a 55 or better. Students with disabilities can also appeal up to 2 of those 5 exams with scores of 52 to 54. And students who struggle to meet to score up to a 52, students who score lower, can also apply for a superintendent determination. So there are pathways to local diplomas for students with disabilities that don't require passing Regents exams. And there's more information about all of these safety nets in regular time at this link. We're going to drop the link into the chat. And we have that information translated into multiple languages also. This is the information that we would love to talk more about, but that we won't be able to cover in depth right now. So we're next going to talk about what this purple circle is, what the +1 options are. So the +1 can be any 5th Regents exam. So as I mentioned, another science, another math, another history. It can be the an SAT-2 exam, a language other than English assessment that's approved by the state, a career and technical education assessment, or a CDOS credential, which we talked about quite a bit at the beginning. Many of these tests have been canceled last year, and many of them are already canceled for this year. So the CDOS is still definitely a +1, but many of the other assessments are not being administered this year.
Ashley, this year you mean like by like at the end of like 2020-21 school year?
Yeah, so we don't know yet if there will be Regents exams issued in June. The New York State has asked the federal government for permission to cancel these exams entirely.
Okay.
The SAT-2 was canceled this year and is no longer going to be administered. If students have SAT-2 scores, they can certainly use them, but that was canceled. The languages other than English assessment, last year, students planning to pass LOT assessments were exempt from the assessment if they were current or former English language learners. And this year, New York State has not made any announcement around the LOT or the language other than English assessment. Career and technical education assessments, most of these are also not able to be administered remotely, and so there are waivers to most of these this year. And as we talked about at the top, the CDOS is definitely still happening, but most of it's happening remotely, and there are waivers to the number of credits that students need. So but it's important to know that these are all +1 options because students may have taken or passed these assessments in a prior year.
That makes sense. Thank you.
Ashley, I just want to answer a question about the SAC that came up in the chat.
Thank you.
So the SAC alone is not a diploma. The SAC is not a diploma. And so a student who receives the SAC most often would go to a program offered through an agency like OPWDD and do and attend a day program. A student with the SAC alone, the SAC is not cannot be used as a diploma option. And so if a student is trying to get into the workforce, they cannot introduce the SAC as a diploma. So if a student has a SAC and they are part of a program like OPWDD, they may be connected with something called supported employment. And with that process may learn some hands-on skills to get a job or to get some volunteer work after they have left high school. I hope that answers the question. I'm going to put that in the chat as well.
Thank you. That'll make it easier to translate.
All right, I think we can move on.
Thank you, Laura Dean. So I'm going to keep talking. I'm going to talk now about some of the COVID-19 exemptions to those Regents exams. So generally, students need to pass 4 plus an additional something, regents exams, 4+1 exams. Last year, New York State approved a number of COVID-19 regents exemptions. So last year, students who passed a course by the end of the 19 school year, meaning any time before August of 2020, or students who were enrolled in the class in 1920 and then made up an NX credit, or are in the process of making up an NX credit. Any student who passed that class at the end of last year is exempt from passing the assessment. So that means that if I was passed my living environments course last year, or I earned an NX in it and I just passed it this last week, then I am exempt from having to take the living environments regents exams for graduation. So in sort of detail, what that meant was that last year, students who planned to take either the June or the August 2020 exam, there were a number of different, the things that they needed to demonstrate was that they took the class last school year that leads to a regents exam, that they told their school that they wanted to retake or take the June or August 2020 regents exam, that they got academic interventions or any kind of additional instruction or tutoring to prepare for the regents exam, or they previously took the exam in June of 2019, August of 2019, or January of 2020. So any student on this list would count as planning to have taken a regents exam last year and should have gotten an exemption. And this is really important because students who get exemptions to regents exams will not need to take that exam again, and that exam will count toward their 4+1 for graduation. We have a detailed summary of this, of all of these COVID-19 changes that we're also going to circulate after the presentation, but we just want to sort of start thinking about all these exemptions. So those are last year's exemptions. This year, the June and August 2021 exams have not been canceled yet. New York State in January asked the federal government for permission to cancel those June and August regents exams. New York State has said that it's not possible to administer those exams safely or fairly, but they have not yet canceled those exams. They did, however, cancel the January regents exam. And so students are exempt from or get credit from the January 2021 regents exam if during the first semester of this school year, they passed a course that would usually end with the January 2021 regents exam, or during the first semester of this year, they completed a makeup program to earn that credit, so like credit recovery, or they needed that exam to graduate at the end of the first semester. So some students who are in their 5th or 6th year of high school might have needed that exam to graduate in January or this month, and those students are exempt from that January regents exam. Again, there are details on this in the handout that we're going to circulate following the presentation. And because New York State has not told us what's happening with regents exams, ceta is part of the coalition that Kelly mentioned at the beginning, called the Coalition for Multiple Pathways to a Diploma. And we have been advocating with parents and educators and advocates around the state, asking New York State to waive regents exam requirements for this school year while they wait for permission from the federal government about whether or not to cancel them. They need some permission from the federal government to cancel them, but the state does not need anybody's permission to say the exemptions from last year are going to continue into this year. So I'm going to put a petition into the chat that members of the Diploma Coalition, including ceta, have been signing and sending to the State Education Department and the State Board of Regents. And if you're interested in joining us, you are certainly welcome to share or sign the petition. Are there questions about regents exam requirements and exemptions for 2019?
시험에 관해서 질문 있으신 분 있으시면 질문해 주시기 바랍니다. Wendy, can you ask parents to ask questions in Chinese?
如果大家有关于这个COVID 期间的豁免的问题，请大家在 chat box 或者打开你的那个音频来提问。
We'll also share this petition with everybody
질문
at the
있어요.
end. Okay.
네, 그거 뭐지 콜리션 관련해서 제가 몇 가지를 보니까 이제 그거 지금 코비드가 아니라도 저 전반적으로 앞으로 계속 그거 디플로마를 받기 위한 알터네이티브 디플로마를 지금 요구를 하고 있잖아요. 근데 구체적으로 어떤 내용의 알터네이티브가 있는지가 궁금해요. 그 정원에 있어서.
Yeah, actually, great question from Hema. So she's, she's aware of the work that the coalition is doing and sort of promoting the alternative diploma. What is the alternative diploma? What would count as alternative diploma? I think she's asking a little more detailed information about alternative diploma.
So the advocacy that we're focusing on this year during COVID-19 is making sure that no student loses the opportunity to graduate because of the pandemic. And so what we are asking is for New York State to extend the COVID-19 exemptions that they passed last year. I'm just going to put those back up on the screen. So last year they canceled regents exams, and any student who passed the class was able to earn a regents diploma. And so we are asking again for New York State to approve that pathway to a diploma for this current school year.
Okay. 작년에 리전트 시험이 취소가 되었기 때문에 올해도 좀 취소를 해달라고 지금 청원을 하고 있는 중이고요. 그 패티션이 지금 링크를 통해서 나갔기 때문에 혹시라도 사인해 주실 수 있으시면 많이들 참여 부탁드립니다. I think Hawa's question is more specific, like more for the long term, not like beyond the COVID.
So beyond COVID, we have for a long time been advocating for paths to graduation that don't rely on high stakes tests. We know that many students, but especially students with disabilities and English language learners, struggle to show what they know on standardized assessments. And so for a long time, we've been asking the state to approve ways to graduate that don't rely on state tests. And so we've asked for them to consider things like performance-based assessments, portfolio assessments, or even exams, but end of course exams that aren't exit exams required to graduate.
Right. And for parents who are not aware of this, New York is quite unique. It's one of the very few states that are doing the regent exam, right?
Yeah, New York is one of only 11 states that still have an exam to graduate from high school.
Right.
And we are the only state in the country with 5 exams to graduate from high school.
Okay. All right. Does that answer your question, Hannah? Okay. All right.
Great. Any other questions before we move on?
I think we're good to go.
Great. Okay, so I want to talk just briefly about students who need additional time. So in general, all students in New York State, including students with disabilities, have the right to stay in school until they earn a diploma or until the June after their 21st birthday, whichever comes first. And earning a diploma means an actual diploma, a local diploma or a regents diploma, not a SAC or a CDOS. So generally those students have the right to stay in school for this much time. Statewide, 95% of students graduate within 4 years. But many students need more time, particularly students learning English, students with disabilities, and these students are also more likely to be students of color, Black and Latinx students. Students who are learning English are much more likely to need 5 or 6 years to graduate from high school. And students with disabilities are 3 times more likely than students without a disability to need at least 6 years of high school. So last year, the Coalition for Multiple Pathways to a Diploma spent a lot of time advocating at the state level for more time for students who were turning 21 and were aging out during the pandemic. And so the state gave guidance to the city, and New York City this school year has allowed additional school services for some 21-year-olds, so students who should have aged out last year. So New York City this year is allowing 21-year-olds who aged out last year to come back to school if they were close to graduation, if their IEP recommended alternate assessment or New York State alternate assessment, which Laura Dean talked about earlier, or if they need transition consultation. So this includes a link to the New York City's policy, the DOE policy on this. If you have a child who aged out last year, but was close to graduating, whose IEP recommended alternate assessment, or who still needs transition supports to be ready to move on to adulthood, your child may be eligible to be in school right now. So if your child turned 21 last school year and you want your child to be receiving remote instruction right now, contact your child's last school. If you want transition services for your child, you should contact the TCAC or the Transition and College Access Center in your local area. We're going to put, I'm putting a TCAC email address in the chat, and we'll also circulate information to the TCACs following the presentation. If your child turned 21 last year and you want them in school, you can also email special education at schools.nyc.gov if you're not able to get them back in school through their school. And then finally, if you believe that your child needed more time in school because of the pandemic, and for some reason the DOE is not allowing you to do that, parents of students with disabilities can also request an impartial hearing for more time in school. And we could do a whole training on impartial hearings for more time in school, but this little mouse shows that this link will be live following the workshop, and we have Know Your Rights material for parents on how to request additional time in school through an impartial hearing if you need to do so. So, like many other things, New York City and New York State have not said what's going to happen to students who are turning 21 and aging out this school year. So if your child in the Coalition for Multiple Pathways to a Diploma is continuing to advocate very hard, and ceta is part of that coalition and is joining in that advocacy, is asking New York State to let students who are going to age out of school this year to come back next year when we can go to school, hopefully in person. If you have a child who is turning 21 this year and you think they're going to need more time in school next year, start talking to your school now about your child's need to come back for an additional year. You can also advocate with ceta and the Diploma Coalition. Talk to ceta, give us a call. We're also really looking for specific parents and students who might be willing to share their story in a letter or talk to a reporter about why it would be really important for the state and the city to give students aging out right now additional time. And so that's a way that you can join us in advocating at the state and the city level for this to happen this year. You also can request an impartial hearing. So through special education due process procedures, you can also file a hearing request asking for more time for your child. That's not a systemic solution, but that is a way to ask the district to be ordered, or a hearing officer to order the district to provide additional time for your child. And we're going to circulate more information about how to request that hearing after the workshop. So are there questions about this? Questions about additional time in school, or what parents need to do to request additional time from last year?
작년에 이어서 20 이상 넘어가신 학생들 좀 더 시간이 필요하다 싶으신 이 분야에 대해서 질문하고 싶으신 분 있으시면 질문해 주세요. 그리고 애슐리가 지금 말씀하신 대로 혹시라도 지금 21살이 넘었는데 더 학교에 있을 시간이 필요하다. 그런 부분을 좀 같이 청원을 하고 싶으시면은 저희 시다한테 연락하셔도 되고 Advocates for Children에 연락하셔도 되고 저희가 지금 좀 개인적인 이야기를 찾고 있기 때문에 연락 주시면 감사하겠습니다. I filled out Access VR application for my sons after graduation, and my son's CCO is going to send it to address in Access VR website. I doubt if it can reach them because I heard there are counselors to connect school, but she doesn't have any connection in school either. I know one person who is Access VR counselor. Should I send this application to that counselor again? So I guess this is more specific to Access VR for this specific case.
Yeah. So with Access VR, if you have the application all set and ready, you can instead of mailing it to their address, you can email it. I put the email in the chat. The email is accessvrapplications@nysed.gov. And so you can just email that documentation directly to Access VR. You can either if you've written out if you filled out the application by hand, you can just take a picture of it on your phone and add it as an attachment, or you can scan it in and send it that way. They're very specific. In the subject line, you have to write Access VR application so that they know this is an application. And one way to make sure that all of your information is getting there, I recommend not only sending the application with the consent form. So the application is 2 pages. So you have one of the applications, the application link, which I can put the one in English in the chat. Put that there. This is the application link, but you also need to send in the confidentiality agreement, which I can't find the link right now, but I can send that to someone in ceta, and they will get that to you. And I also recommend sending if the student has an IEP, sending that in, or an evaluation, something that shows that they have a disability, send all of that information in at one time so that you can get the process moving a little bit faster. I'm
just gonna open up the application that you sent. Does this document or application specify what other extra documentation that the parents need to attach in the email?
I don't believe that it does, but AFC does have a tip sheet on Access VR that I can pull up on our website, and then put that link into the chat. And that tip sheet will tell you all of the documents to get ready for the application. The tip sheet does not include the Access VR email. We're updating our tip sheet to include that. And so hopefully within the next week or so, that'll be available on that.
Thank you. 지금 Access VR 신청하시는 분들은 아마 우편으로 보내기가 불편하시고 또 받을지 안 받을지 좀 확실히 안 가잖아요. 그래서 Access VR 지금 챗방에 공유된 이메일 요 accessvrapplications@nysed.gov 여기로 보내시면 되시고요. 그 이메일 타이틀을 Access VR application이라고 확실하게 쓰셔야 된다고 그러네요. 그리고 이 애플리케이션 지금 PDF 파일 여기다 공유를 해주셨는데요. 요거랑 confidentiality form이라는 거랑 함께 보내시면서 장애가 있다는 증거 같은 거, IEP나 뭐 diagnosis 이런 거 좀 추가적으로 보내시게 되면 더 빨리 진행된다고 그렇게 말씀하십니다.
저 질문 있어요.
네.
네, 그거 올해 21살이 되는 학생들의 경우에 extend해서 학교에 머무를 수 있잖아요. 그럴 경우에 IEP 상에 있는 서비스나 플레이스먼을 그대로 지키면서 가는지 그게 정확하게 명시가 되어 있는지 궁금해요.
She's asked another great question. So for students who are older than 21 and want to extend that school year, will their IEP continue and all those services will be continuing in the extended year or not?
That's a great question. So this question about Access VR is a really good example of why many students need more time in school. So I'm sharing my screen again. Last year, New York City allowed students who were close to graduation or whose IEPs recommended alternate assessment to come back to school. But they're also offering transition consultation services from the tcac. And so I put into the chat contact information from the tcac. Students who had met their IEP goals but just needed assistance transitioning to something like OPWDD or Access VR can reach out to their tcac to get free assistance on transition consultation. In terms of what services students should be getting this year, if they aged out last year, students should be receiving the services in their IEP according to the DOE policy. We have heard that is happening for students who attend Department of Education schools and particularly District 75 schools. However, students who attended state-approved non-public schools or NPSs, the city is not paying for them to go to school this year. And so that's a huge problem. And one of the things that we're advocating for changes to in next year if students are allowed to return. So this is all sort of Department of Education policy, and there's no clear legal rights about what your services should be this year for students who are 21. But the sort of DOE policy and what they're offering is in the link that will circulate with the Department of Education. If you are to file an impartial hearing request, asking a hearing officer to order more time, the hearing officer would at the end of the hearing tell the Department of Education exactly what it must provide your child. And so that could be, you could ask a hearing officer to order the Department of Education to provide all of your child's current IEP services for an additional year or even 2 years. And you could certainly contact our helpline if you have questions about filing an impartial hearing for your specific child.
21살이 이제 넘어가는 학생들 같은 경우 이제 학교가 1년 더 연장이 될 경우 IEP와 서비스가 연장되어야 한다고 그러네요. 근데 혹시라도 그렇지 않다고 그러시면 impartial hearing을 통해서 다시 요구를 하실 수가 있고요. Actually, I forgot the school who's currently not paying for the
State-approved non-public schools, or NPSs.
NPS 학교들 같은 경우에는 1년 연장되는 학교에 대한 학비를 DOE에서 내지 않는다고 그러네요. 그래서 그 부분 좀 참고하시면 되겠습니다.
So that is the end of the formal information that I'm sharing, but I'm putting into the chat a feedback form that I would really appreciate it if folks could fill out. And I'm also happy to stick around to answer additional questions.
지금 챗박스에 서베이 하나가 나갔는데요. 요거는 Advocates for Children 쪽에서 공유하는 서베이고요. 좀 작성해 주시면은 이분들한테 많이 도움이 될 것 같습니다.
And after this presentation, you can absolutely call us with questions, and I'm putting the information for our helpline into the screen right now, and we'll circulate it again. And folks who answer that helpline can use interpretation services and speak to you in any language that you are most comfortable in.
지금 끝나시고 go ahead, Wendy.
Yeah, there's a further question about when we say we ask for the extended service for the student over 21st years old. If it's a non-public school, they don't pay. But if it's still in public school, would DOE pay for that? Just clarify.
So right now, the Department of Education is providing services in public school to students who aged out last year. If they meet one of these three criteria, they were either close to graduation, or they have alternate assessment, or they need consultation services. The Department of Education is not paying for children in NPSs. The only way to get the city or the state to pay for a non-public school would be to file an impartial hearing right now.
Okay, thank you. 那个刚才李彩霞你提的那个问题，就是他说，如果你是马上要毕业，或者是 IEP 要求他就是获得这个服务，他是可以的。但是如果不是的话，那你就可能需要通过上诉的手段来得到这个付款。
Thank you, Wendy. Ashley, if we can go back to the contact information quick, let me inform the parents about the helpline. 여기 지금 보시는 슬라이드에 전화번호가 적혀져 있는데요. 이 번호로 월요일부터 목요일 10시, 오전 10시부터 오후 4시까지 전화하시면은 한국어 도움 받으실 수 있습니다. 프레젠테이션은 여기까지가 끝이고요. 혹시 질문이 있으시면은 애슐리하고 로라딘이 지금 계속 좀 있을 거라고 그러시니까요. 남아서 질문 물어봐 주시면 되겠습니다.
There's another question on chatting room.
Oh, sure.
네.
I sent the access. Okay, is it okay? I sent the access VR application that I filled it out. Sent it to school principal and she sent it to CCO. Seems like they don't know. Can I send it to the principal again and send it to the online and IEP? Laura Dean, I think you may want to address that. I think probably emailing it to that address will be the quickest, I assume. But if you have any other tips, please let us know.
Yeah. So the best way to get the Access VR services is to email the application directly to Access VR. I put the email address in the chat again. So email it directly to that email address. The school and Access VR, they're two separate, or like the school's one system and Access VR is a different system. There are some counselors that are available at the schools, but easiest way would be to send it directly to Access VR. You as the parent have to do that.
Okay, thank you. Any
Arjun,
other...
could they copy the principal on that email?
Absolutely. Yeah, you can, in the CC line, you can put the principal's email address in case there are any documents that the school may want to attach to that application.
Okay, I think we are on time. Thank you so much for this informative presentation. This is certainly a very complex topic, and it's even more complex in the time of the pandemic. So we will, Hewa and Wendy, can we share the fact sheet links in the chat box so that people can access the fact sheets, please? So we're sharing those fact sheets with you, so please click it and download them and spend some time being familiar with your options. And then if you have any further questions, you can reach out to us, and you can reach out to Advocates for Children of New York, and they will be able to help you guys. Thank you so much, Ashley and Laura Dean. This was tremendously helpful.
No problem. Have a wonderful day.
It's our
Yeah.
pleasure. Thank you so much, guys.
Bye, everyone.
Thank
Bye-bye.
you.